Hello guys and girls, Raj here, back with another video. So this is beginning of the March. All the companies are hiring on full force for the cloud jobs, and in the cloud interview, DevOps is a super important topic. So this week's video, we are gonna go over some of the DevOps interview questions from moderate to advanced, more suitable for the architect level or lead DevOps engineer level. So the questions we are going to cover today are: what is the difference between continuous delivery and continuous deployment? Explain a DevOps pipeline that you have implemented, and we are going to do that by explaining a Kubernetes pipeline. Then tell me about a challenge you faced with DevOps. How do you implement unit testing in DevOps? How do you implement security in your DevOps pipeline? And is infrastructure as code necessary for DevOps pipeline? And finally, how will you implement changes in multiple AWS accounts? As always, I have given the timestamps for your viewing convenience. All right, let's get started. So question one, what is the difference between continuous delivery and continuous deployment? So DevOps has these four main phases: source, build, test, and prod. Source is when you check in your source code. Build is when you compile your code. Unit test, run unit test, and you create the artifact such as like a jar file or zip file that is ready to be implemented. Then you test. You do integration testing with other systems, load testing, UI testing, penetration testing, etc. And then you deploy the artifact to the production. So the source and the build phase is termed as continuous integration, where the code is compiled, unit testing is done, and the artifact is created that is ready to be deployed. Continuous delivery is the process of deploying that artifact to the prod with a manual intervention. So you guys and girls see this checkpoint sign. That means that once all the unit testing and the integration testing has been done, and before it gets deployed to the production, a human comes and checks if everything is okay. If everything is fine, he or she clicks a button and the package gets deployed into production. Continuous deployment, as you can see, there is no checkpoint. So continuous deployment is the process of deploying the artifact without any human intervention. If all the automated testing is passed, then it gets automatically deployed. But if the automated testing fails, then it stops, sends a notification. Then some human comes and take a look. All right, next. Explain a DevOps pipeline that you have implemented. So when they ask that, generally if you can give a Kubernetes example or a serverless example, that's impressive because Kubernetes is pretty hot right now. So in this video, I'm gonna go over a Kubernetes pipeline. So the big picture for Kubernetes pipeline is the developer checks the code into a code repository, and then the code is Dockerized and a container image is created from that code, and then this Docker container and this container image is stored into a container image repository, and then it is deployed into a Kubernetes cluster. The process till the container image is stored into a repository is the build process, and then the next part is the deployment. So basically continuous integration, and then either continuous delivery or continuous deployment. So if we want to take it one step further, the code repo could be GitHub, and to Dockerize your application, you need some tool to run some commands, right? And then the container image can be stored in a container image repository. And in the deployment phase, again, you need some tools to run commands to deploy those images into the Kubernetes cluster. And those commands could be using Helm commands or kubectl commands. So if we take these concepts and go one step further, This is the actual pipeline. Code gets checked into, let's say, Git, and some of the tools where you can run the Dockerized commands could be GitLab or Code Build or Jenkins, and then it could be stored in, let's say, ECR or Elastic Container Registry, or tried, tested at Docker Hub. Again, the deployment could be done via Jenkins, Code Deploy, or GitLab. So basically any DevOps tool that can run Helm or kubectl commands, and that could be deployed in a EKS or Elastic Kubernetes cluster, in AWS, or it could be any cloud really. The flow will remain the same. So on this, I actually have a separate video where I show how do you test your code in local machine, then you Dockerize it, create a container image in your local machine, test that container in your local machine, and then how you migrate that to the cloud, then you expose it to the outside world, scale it, etc. So basically end to end. I'll give the link up top as well. Check it out if you're interested. Moving forward, tell me about a challenge you faced in DevOps. So what the interviewer is trying to see is not just the challenge. The interviewer is looking how you solved it. So one of the challenge I faced was we were running pipeline using Jenkins, and Jenkins generally in AWS or any cloud, you have to run in a VM, right? So there is a primary node, and then depending on the workload, the other secondary nodes get spun up. So if a lot of teams are deploying changes or checking in code at the same time, sometimes it's very slow to scale, and sometimes it cannot keep up because the primary node has a fixed size, and to upgrade it to a bigger size requires some manual intervention, or it takes some time even if you want to do it automated way. So there is a scaling challenge with that. We also faced idle cost because Jenkins runs in an EC2 server. Even if there is no deployment going on, you still have to pay for the primary EC2 node. It has a steep learning curve, and also it's hard to troubleshoot because there are so many Jenkins plugins. If the team just adopted a new plugin, they have to get used to how the plugin does error reporting and all that stuff. So how did I solve it? So I used Code Pipeline for newer projects. Code Pipeline scales automatically. It doesn't use any EC2 or any server. It is serverless, so it is pay as you go. And I could use all my existing AWS learning, such as checking metrics in CloudWatch, CloudTrail, etc., to use Code Pipeline. And also it integrates really well with other AWS services. If I want to call a CloudFormation, if I want to invoke a Lambda or some other AWS services, it supports all that out of the box. If you don't want to mention Code Pipeline because it's cloud specific, you can also mention GitLab Runner. So GitLab Runner also solves some of the challenges that Jenkins has. Actually, the recent GitLab Runner can run on a Fargate, so you don't have to pay for the EC2, and it scales pretty well. So moving on, how do you implement unit testing in DevOps? So for this, you use a unit testing framework. So how you do it is, you create a code. In that code, this is just for testing, you execute your code that you are trying to implement. So if you have created a jar file to be implemented, but it hasn't been implemented yet, you execute your code with predefined input. And you know what output you should get for those predefined input. And once you get the output, you match that actual response with the expected response. And if it doesn't match, you can also control the percentage of error. Let's say you call your code 10 times, and if 80% of test case passes, then it's good. So if 8 test case pass, then you can mark it as complete. But depending on that, if it is less than 8, then you can error it out. And where do you implement this code? So one way I have done it is in the pipeline, implement a Lambda, and this Lambda, using this unit testing framework, calls your actual code, match, compare, all that stuff, and either error out or pass. So if you want to see this in action, I also have a separate video where I show with actual demo how I implemented this in the pipeline. So I'm going to give the link up top. Feel free to check it out as well. Moving on, very important topic. How do you implement security in your DevOps pipeline? So this goes into the DevSecOps territory. So DevOps plus security. So security of the DevOps lifecycle. So the first thing you have to implement is authorization, as in the person who is submitting the pipeline, does he or she have the authority to implement the application. So generally how we implement it is when you submit check in a code and a DevOps job gets submitted, we know who submitted or checked in the code, and we know what application that code is being deployed to. So generally we have a LDAP group, and that user should be part of that LDAP group for that application. That's how we check if the user has permission or not. You can also implement it using IAM user groups, different ways. But if the user is in the group, the pipeline goes fine. If the user who submitted this code or the DevOps pipeline is not in that LDAP group or the IAM user group, then it is rejected and the pipeline fails. Another part of implementing security in the DevOps is you have to scan your code for vulnerabilities, such as you should scan CloudFormation for poor security. So like if you are creating a security group in the CloudFormation with everything very open, anyone can come and access your application, it should check that. You can scan code for vulnerable libraries, SQL injection, etc. Like if you're using some library in your code which is not secure, check against the OSAP top 10 vulnerabilities, etc. You also scan the repository for Docker container. You should scan the image and see if the image is secure. And you can also scan the running code and container. So when the code is running or the container is running in the production, you should also scan that. It will be impressive if you mention the tool names. So for example, the scan coding for vulnerabilities, you can scan CloudFormation using CFNNAG. It's open source plugin. There are also many tools that you can use. You can Google it. One of them is like Parliament, and there are many others. Scanning code for vulnerable libraries, you can use Fortify for this. Scan repository. If you are using ECR gives you this feature. You can also use tools like sysdig, Falco, etc. to scan your container repository. Scan running code container. You can use Twistlock for container. For scan running code, you could use Black Duck, and you could Google it. There are many other tools. Finally, this is again, you can impress the interviewer. So the DevSecOps is general security, best practice. You said all that. Then mention that, hey, if your application needs even more security compliance, such as FedRAMP High, HIPAA, SOC, etc., say that you can appropriately pick Gov Cloud instead of commercial cloud, right? And you can pick and choose different services that is compatible with this security compliance requirement. So I'm going to give a link in the description. You can check it out for AWS, what services are what compliant, like what AWS DevOps services have FedRAMP High, HIPAA, etc. So you can give a couple of this example if you're interviewing in a company with a very high security requirement. Also, it's a good idea to explain with one actual example, like if you are interviewing for like a Kubernetes architect or something, you don't have to go through like regular scanning code, you can explain with one example. Moving on, is infrastructure as code necessary for DevOps pipelines? So this is a trick question, right? So infrastructure as code example is AWS CloudFormation, right? So you can run a CloudFormation from a DevOps tool or yourself, and it spins up AWS infrastructure. There are other ways to spin up infrastructure as well, such as you can run AWS CLI commands, right? So basically in your DevOps pipeline, you can have some plugin or a compute or a tool which can run AWS CLI commands to go spin up AWS resources. So infrastructure as code is not absolutely necessary, but it makes your life much easier. So this is the part the interviewer is trying to listen from you, right? Trying to see if you answer this. So infrastructure as code makes it faster. Why? Because it's easier to change and version control a infrastructure as code template than commands, right? Because you can check in the template in a Git and you can revision it, etc. And you can run tools on it than just AWS CLI commands. Also, generally with this infrastructure and infrastructure as code tools such as, let's say, CloudFormation or CDK, AWS gives you controls and monitoring where you can go and track changes to the infrastructure. Like before you deploy a CloudFormation, you can run a change set and see what changes are being done, right? Before you run the template. So there are a lot of out-of-the-box features that you get with infrastructure as code. With just running the AWS CLI commands, you do not get all that. Also, all DevOps tools support infrastructure as code. Any tool you name, such as CodePipeline, Jenkins, GitLab, Flux, Spinnaker, etc., they all support infrastructure as code. For running CLI, you need to code the AWS CLI commands in plugin or maybe like in Lambda or something and put it in your pipeline. So there's additional management overhead and headache for running CLI commands in DevOps pipeline. Also, try to understand why is the interviewer asking that. Is the interviewer thinking that if they use CloudFormation, for example, they might get locked into one cloud? So mention that, hey, you can all use tools like Terraform, which is infrastructure as code, which can help you deploy infrastructure in any cloud. So you don't get locked into a particular cloud, and you can use this Terraform from any DevOps tools along with all these advantages that I just went through. All right, moving on. How will you implement changes in multiple AWS accounts? So again, this is a really realistic question that if you haven't worked in actual DevOps project, you will never face this, because if you are just learning DevOps, you are doing everything in one account. But in reality, enterprises have multiple production or test accounts. And you cannot just go and implement in each account separately. It is impossible. So how do you do this using DevOps pipeline? So how you do this is using a hub and spoke model. So it looks like a bicycle tire, right? With hub as the central account, and then the spokes are in different child accounts. The central account is called a primary or master or shared services account. This master account assumes roles in all these child accounts and then submits CloudFormation stacks. So all the DevOps tools and administration needs to be done only in this master account. So you submit, let's say, CloudFormation stack once in this master account using DevOps pipeline, and this master account can assume role in the accounts that you want it to go and do it, and just submit CloudFormation stacks into multiple accounts. So you don't have to define the same DevOps pipeline in all these separate accounts, and you don't have to go and submit each separately. So this is a trick question. This for those of you who are working in actual enterprise projects in DevOps, that's how you implement this. All right, so that's all the question and answers. Also, coming up, I am preparing myself for Kubernetes certifications. So I plan to do a lot of videos and hands-on and practice tests for these Kubernetes certifications. So I'm going to do that all in YouTube. So please like and subscribe if you want to be part of that. Also, if you like this video, smash that like button, click subscribe. Let me know in the comment section if there are any other DevOps interview questions that you want me to cover. All the likes and subscribe really help this channel grow. We are almost at 10,000 subscribers. Can't wait till we cross that milestone. All right, with that, guys and girls, I end this video. I'll see you guys and girls in the next video. Bye.